The manager should not just answer the question. Team member comes to the manager, says, hey, here's the situation. What do we do? Bad manager says, here's what you should do. Good manager says, tell me what you think you should do and walk me through your decision-making process, and forces that team member to exercise that skill of decision-making and synthesizing our core values and our previous experience.
Hello, my fellow Success with Class listeners. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode with Peter Lohmann. This gentleman is a wizard when it comes to long-term property management. He was an electrical engineer, and he applied the systems and processes of engineering to break down his operational procedures in property management to high success. So in this episode, we dive really into systems, processes, operations, how he leads team meetings. He's the CEO of RL Property Management, as well as Crane Mastermind, and he's starting an electrical engineering company. So we go into a little bit of time management, how he's able to kind of handle 3 companies at once, and how he really is striving for significant growth in the future. He's a very intentional person, very well read. We go over some books such as Traction or the E-Myth, and how to implement some of those systems within your business to really empower your teammates and employees, I should say, to strive for success. So if you're ever interested in property management or business operations and integrations and systems, this is the episode for you. We do a tremendous deep dive into it. With that being said, without further ado, let's go into the episode. Good afternoon, my fellow Success with Class listeners. Thank you for tuning in to another episode with Service Business Success with me, Steve Class. I am joined today by a serial entrepreneur. This gentleman was actually introduced to me from another person in the property management industry. He's like, you have to talk to Peter. He knows everything about property management. He's the go-to guy, and he's like the nicest human being you'll ever meet in your entire life. And Peter and I had a quick conversation probably a few months back. I'm like, he is the nicest guy I probably ever had a conversation with. And I was like, I really want to get this gentleman on the podcast. He's been on plenty of shows before. He has a wealth of experience and knowledge in entrepreneurship and property management. So he's not just pigeonholed into the PM realm here. With that being said, Peter, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate those kind words. I'll try and live up to that.
Yeah, no worries, man. I'm sure you will. So I always love to hear the origin story of an entrepreneur, of how you got started. I assume you weren't out of the gate just an entrepreneur at 11. Maybe you were. Maybe you were selling lemonade at the stands. But what was it? Corporate America? Was that your first career trajectory before you went into entrepreneurship? Yeah, I'd love to learn a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, happy to do that. So my background is actually engineering. So I have a degree in electrical engineering, and I worked as a control systems engineer right out of college for about 5 years. So, yep, corporate America, although it was fairly small engineering consulting companies. Worked at 2 different firms during that time. And my partner, who's also an engineer, he's a civil engineer. He and I, he helped me get the job at the engineering firm he worked at. This is like my best friend from high school. We actually came up through Boy Scouts together and
very cool.
Stayed in touch. Yeah. So he and I decided that we wanted to go into business for ourselves. We were tired of working for other people, and we wanted to build something of our own and contribute to our own success, not just our bosses or the owners of whatever company we worked at. Around this time, we read Rich Dad Poor Dad, which had a big impact on us in terms of reframing how we think about the difference between being an employee or being a business owner or being self-employed or an investor. They have that quadrant they talk about.
Yep.
So in 2013, I quit my engineering job and started RL Property Management. Now, prior to that, he and I had bought some single-family rentals here in Columbus, and we were self-managing those. So we had some experience with real estate investing and property management. And what we thought was, we'll just start doing this for other people, because we saw a need for residential property management here in Columbus, Ohio, that didn't suck. And there definitely was a need for that. Where we messed up is that we thought it was going to be easy, and it is not easy. There's a reason that most property management companies are terrible, and it's not just because all the people who operate those companies are stupid. It's because there's some systemic structural problems with the way property management is positioned that make it difficult to do well. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's what we did, and that was the start. So day one, it was sometime in April of 2013. It was just me in my apartment, no clients, no units, no office, nothing.
I know the
Just
feeling. Yeah.
cold start. Other than the small handful of units that we owned and self-managed.
You mentioned your electrical engineering background, and this is something that I've encountered with a lot of successful property managers, is that typically they'll have a background in some type of deep level operations. And I know engineering isn't necessarily like operating of managing a lot of manpower. It's more of like very, very minute details and really honing in. What skill sets did you take away from that career that you're applying right now into property management?
Yeah, great question. I'm really thankful for my engineering background. My parents pushed me into engineering. It's not something I probably would have done otherwise, and I'm glad now that they did. What you learn in engineering, I actually think it's kind of similar to law in that you're right, it demands attention to detail. It forces you to become comfortable with breaking down large, complex problems and translating those into bite-sized chunks that you can then understand and then start to build back up, like block by block, to gain an understanding of the system as a whole, or the machine as a whole, or the case as a whole. But it's fundamentally about understanding at the lowest level how everything works. And that skill set turns out to be really valuable in small business, because in small service businesses, all those details have to be right. You don't have this big corporate structure to fall back on. You don't have superstars who can fly in from corporate and save the day. It's just you and your customers and your employees. And so you've got to get everything right. So I am really glad that I had that opportunity. I understand not everyone has that background. That doesn't mean you can't be successful. You just got to lean in. I think the bigger takeaway is to lean into your strengths. And so the strengths I had were from that engineering background. I leaned into those, and that worked well for me.
Now, when you launched this PM business here, you said you saw that there was a need for really good property management. That's how I ended up launching mine. Did you go into it with a runway of like, hey, I need 6 months of capital reserves to hit like a break-even point? Like, did you formulate this plan of action of like, I know this is not going to be an overnight success. I'm going to have to really, dig into the trenches here. And just for other entrepreneurs out there looking to launch, like what is your reality versus your expectation?
We did exactly that. We did some forecasting and financial modeling to figure out, what do we think it's going to cost to operate this business? What's the revenue we're going to generate with each new door that we bring under management? How many of those doors do we think we're going to bring in month 1, month 2, month 3? And just kind of modeled out the first, like you said, 6 months to a year to figure out what's the break-even point where we're bringing in as much as we're spending, and then what's the next level we're trying to get at where we can actually start making some kind of a salary from the business. We still have all those old spreadsheets. It's funny to go back and look at them, because I remember vividly at the time, because my partner and I were doing this together, I remember thinking toward the end of our projections, like after 1 year, after 2 years, we had these numbers, and it was like 100 units, 150 units. And I remember thinking,
it. Yeah.
honestly, I didn't think we would do it. It sounded like a fantasy. It sounded crazy. And when I looked at the numbers that would drop to the bottom line when we got to that number of units, that also seemed like a crazy fantasy. Now, of course, the expenses end up being higher than you forecasted. And also what you think of as like a large sum of take-home money at the end of the day changes over the years. But nevertheless, it was fun to go back and review some of those. And I do think that was really valuable, because it forced us to have financial discipline early on, both on the cost side, meaning we were very cognizant of keeping our costs down wherever possible, and on the revenue side, we didn't work for peanuts. Now, we have raised our prices significantly since back then when we started, but even back then, we wouldn't work for free. We wouldn't work for super cheap. We understood, and this was another advantage of coming from an engineering background, is that we understood the value of our time. and we understood the value. We were confident in the value that we were going to be providing for our customers. So it was straightforward for us to set a rate, a property management fee, and stand behind it, and not just cave in every single time an investor asks for a discount.
That is invaluable advice, and that's something I wish I took, because when I was first starting out, I was like, how can I get my first client? Now, bend over backwards just to get that client, and you devalue yourself tremendously when you do that, and you end up taking on bad owners that just want the cheapest, lowest value. And I didn't really realize that until a year into the business that I really, like, what is my worth? And, the 80-20 principle, like, most of my headaches were coming from the bad clients that only wanted the cheapest price and questioned every single change order or repair bill. So I'm glad that you had enough foresight, much better than me, when you first launched there. So did that come to fruition? Did you end up having 100 doors in a year? Is that was that the reality?
Yeah. I keep a graph showing our growth rate over time, and we did hit 100 doors within a year. Now, part of that was because we got a little bit lucky. We had some larger investors bring larger portfolios of 30 or 40 doors. I think there was one or two of those in there. But, that's just, you're going to have some of those, right? And you're going to have some bad luck. So take the good luck and celebrate it when it comes along. And we also were at that time, we were managing properties that we would no longer manage today. It's much easier to grow a management company if you're willing to take on low-end properties, like a bunch of Section 8 properties or properties in low-income neighborhoods, because there's so few property managers who are willing to do that. Now, you end up learning the hard way why that's the case over time. But in the beginning, it's not a bad way to come up. It's a way to quickly get some cash flowing and get the operational reps that you're going to need quickly.
Now, are these mainly multis or single families that you were targeting at the time?
A mixture of single family and small multifamily.
Okay, so the 1 to 4 units, not like big 16-unit complexes or anything like that.
Actually, we did take on some of those pretty early. We weren't afraid of those because, to us, and I still believe this, they're managed the same way as a single family rental. There's very, very few differences between a single family rental and a 20-unit apartment building. The big difference to me is assuming that the 20-unit has exterior entry. In other words, no like interior hallways where you have to go into the building to get into your unit. As long as you can get into the unit from the outside, it's managed in a very similar way to a single family home. Obviously, there are some differences, but they're pretty minor. Once you have those interior hallways, especially if there's elevators, that's a slightly different model. It requires a different level of attention and a different level of there's just some differences there that make it can be a problem if you're not treating it. If you're treating it the same way you do a single family, you end up making some pretty significant operational mistakes. Ask me how I know.
Yeah, and also the heating elements in like hot water tanks. Like, does each unit have individual ones? Is it one giant boiler for the building? It gets a little bit more complex. I prefer the 1 to 4. It all depends what kind of property manager you want to become. Whether it's like Class B properties that are single family, duplexes, or if you want, you could definitely find B, large scale apartment complexes too. It just depends on your area. So I know Columbus, Ohio, I know it's gone up in the past 2 years, but it's semi-affordable compared to the East Coast, which is I'm on, or the West Coast. So I'm sure you're seeing a lot of investors you're working with as well who are coming into the area to buy up real estate. But that's fantastic growth that you've had in a year. It took me 2 years to get there. So with that being said, this is something that I've always pondered. Why do you think, as a property manager, you don't have a sweeping company, ignoring Cushman because that's very commercialized, taking over like the coast or mid-state, where they're managing 10,000 units and they're in Columbus, they're in Iowa, they're in Cleveland, they're everywhere. Like, what do you think is the big struggle that property managers have of expanding outside of their area?
Well, there are a couple groups making a swing at that. You've got your Evernest, your Poplar, Pure, Mind, maybe. So there's some groups that have cracked that 10,000 unit mark. They're not everywhere. And quite frankly, I think they're having a hard time with it. And I think they would agree that it's very, very challenging. I think there's a few things going on there. It's probably a big question we could spend a lot of time on, but I'll try and be quick. Property management is fundamentally extraordinarily difficult. operationally. Anyone who's run a management company for more than a couple of years would agree with that. There's just such a large surface area of what you touch and what you have to be good at and be involved with. I mean, everything from accounting to home services to project management to debt collection to dealing with fair housing. I mean, you've got fiduciary responsibility thrown in there. You've got licensing and regulatory compliance every which direction. You're dealing with evictions. And so just when you feel like you're getting good at something, now here comes some new thing that you haven't dealt with before
Sweeping
that you didn't
legislation,
even
yeah, that
know,
came
you
overnight,
know,
right?
there's a fire at an
Yeah,
apartment you manage. There's new laws in one of the cities that you're managing properties in. There's some weird income tax thing that you didn't know you had to file. You know, you got an owner who's starting a lawsuit. It's very, very hard. And it's also regional. So the way I manage properties here in Columbus, Ohio, the laws, the customs, the lease, what tenants expect, all of that is different in Cincinnati, let alone in another state. Like, for example, in Boston, all unit turns are on one day. Like the whole city moves on
it's
one day.
incredible.
It's crazy. I was on this podcast with Axel Ragnaros, and I might be getting that last name wrong, but he was describing this to me. It's insane. So that's just one example of the challenges you have if you're trying to scale and grow a management company.
And I would agree
So it,
wholeheartedly. I've been into many other industries. I've never seen more operationally intense business than property management.
yeah,
And you don't really realize that when you go into it, of how heavy the accounting side is too. Of just
yeah,
going into it and just doing all these owner draws. So to your point, yeah,
yeah.
it is insane.
You know, there's operationally intense companies that have scaled nationwide. So that can't be all there is to it. You know, the recurring revenue nature of the business is an advantage typically. It's nice to be able to build up a book of business, but it can be challenging because it lets us kind of coast on the sales and marketing side of things. I've got a friend of mine who's always pointing this out to me. He's like, you can do nothing for 3 months and your business is fine. You could not sell a single new door. And I'm like, yeah, you're right.
It's very true.
But the problem is that lets you get complacent. And so if you're not aggressively keeping up with sales and marketing strategies and tactics and figuring out what works and constantly pushing the boundaries of growth, churn starts to eat your lunch. And the longer you've been in business, the more this starts to become a factor. Every year you're going to lose X percent of your doors under management due to sales, due to
Yeah,
owners
no
getting
fault of
fed
your own.
up,
Just
due
like,
to
hey, I want to
mistakes.
sell my 4 unit,
Yeah,
whatever it is. It's the nature of the beast.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the larger you get, the larger a 5% churn becomes in door count, right? 5% of 100 doors versus 5% of 1,000 doors that you lose every year suddenly becomes a large concern, and it becomes a barrier to future growth. So these companies who are trying to do roll-up strategies and take thousands and thousands of doors under management under one corporate umbrella, they have this churn problem at every single individual geography that they manage. And from the perspective of the customers, a large national company is not an advantage to them. In fact, they would probably prefer to work with Bob, who lives down the
100
street.
And I've
Right?
had many calls where
want
the
it.
reason I've got the client was like, oh, you just do like this one little township and you only
Yeah.
manage at the time 30 doors. Great. This other guy had 500 and that's too many. And I got the sale.
Yeah, he's not going to pay attention
Right.
to me. I'm going to be a small fish in his big pond. Yeah. So you got all these factors working against you. I think someone will probably end up doing it, but it's going to have to be a group who has respect for the problem of how insanely hard this is to execute at scale operationally. And I think a lot of the groups, the bigger they get, the more distracted they become with all the financing activities and all of the corporate stuff. And they start to lose sight of the boots on the ground, day-to-day experience of their residents and their clients, and how you can ensure that consistency of experience for every client, for every resident through time and across geographies. That is difficult because you have to somehow like orchestrate all the local property managers across the country to do what you want them to do, right? To use the tool you want them to use, to answer the phone the way you want them to answer it, to follow up with every phone call with an email the way you want them to do that. Like, that's really hard. That's really difficult to
Tremendously.
make that happen.
I encourage anyone who hasn't read the E-Myth to give it a look. By Michael Gerber, he speaks about systemization and processes, and it's easier, very much easier said than done, because of the complexities of each township laws and irregularities that can occur across the industry. Now, I know that you no longer only have 100, and you're up to what, close to 1,000 at this point?
We're coming up on 700.
700. That's great.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that. So, and I know that you're also the CEO of an engineering company, and you also have Crane, which is more of like a mastermind for property managers. Speak to me for your own internal company. We'll start on the PM world with 700 doors. How are you managing your teammates and staff there? I assume there's a leadership team. Is this going to be a portfolio management? Is it more of like, hey, we all help each other out? I'm just curious to see what's worked for you and what you can help other listeners with.
Sure. So we're departmental style at RL Property Management, which means every function does that function for the whole company, for all 700 units, right? So our leasing team is leasing for all 700 units. Our accounting group is doing the accounting for all 700 units. We have someone who answers the phones on occupied maintenance requests. They're doing it for all 700 units, rather than a portfolio style where this property manager does everything, but for only a select group.
Yeah, for only 100.
So, yeah. So we're departmental style, and we do have a strong leadership team in place. That's the only way I'm able to do things like this and run Crane and buy an engineering company and these other things I'm doing, because the leadership team is in place and is taking care of a lot of the day-to-day, almost all of it. In fact, I think last time I estimated this, I figure I'm doing something related to RL property management about 15 to 20 hours a week. I don't think it's more than that.
That's fantastic.
And I take a month off every year. So every June, I'm completely out of pocket for RL property management. And I come back after a month and we see how they did. So I've done that for a few years in a row now. So you do have to get really comfortable with delegating. You have to find great people or bring folks up through your organization and train them and empower them and trust them and guide them along the path to the point where they can take over whole divisions for you. So it's kind of like leadership and management fundamentals at work, which I think is, you hear those words so much that you just sort of glaze over them as an entrepreneur, leadership and management. And it doesn't fully sink in how important those concepts are and how to actually practice them within a small business. But for me, that looks like empowering my team to do everything at the company, come to me with crazy, weird exceptions. Everything else gets documented and they follow the process, or they use their best judgment. So part of this is finding people who are willing to do that, who have the intelligence required to make good decisions, who have the experience required to start to understand, oh, this is one of those. I remember how that panned out. And part of that is how you show up, right? So you have to be comfortable with letting them make the decisions, even if they're slightly different than the decisions you would have made. And that is a very difficult thing for a lot of entrepreneurs, because for a lot of us, we got where we are by doing the hard work, by doing things right, by doing things better than anyone else, by hustling, by doing it ourselves, by pitching in, by learning everything and doing everything. And that's required to get from 0 to 1. But once you make it to 1, you have to start to offload that to your team. And that's a totally different skill set. It's a totally different mindset. So it's a process, and it's something that took me a while to get good at, because it's easy to mess that up too, right? You can go too far and suddenly you're refusing to answer any questions. You don't even look at the financials. You're just like, nope, it's on you. It's your responsibility. And now your company's, start making major, big problems, right? So it's that level of delegation without abdication.
So what do you look for when you are hiring someone? What would you rate compared to like their EQ, emotional intelligence, versus their skill set? Like, what would you say an ideal candidate is for, say, a property management position?
I really recommend the book Who on hiring. Excellent book. We follow that framework to a T for every hire we make, all the way down from admin assistant to like a leadership team hire. Um, and we also use predictive index, which is really similar to culture index. It's a personality profile. They hate when you say that, but it is a personality profiling tool to help you understand, hey, are the natural strengths of this person a fit for the role that I'm hiring for, right? You can imagine that the go-to example here, what makes someone a great salesperson, that's not necessarily a great fit for an accounting role. And so if you give a personality profile assessment to somebody and they're really extroverted and they get all their energy from being around other people, and they're not so great with details, but they love to do deals, you put that person in an accounting role. If they've applied for an accounting role, you're not setting that person up for success. So the level of EQ required depends on the role. So an accounting role, not a lot of EQ required there. High attention to detail, comfortable working by themselves for long periods of time. But if I'm hiring someone for an HR function or a sales function, definitely high EQ required. Not necessarily looking for them to be a NASA, engineer. So some of the other factors become less important.
So tell me a little bit more about how you hold everyone accountable, because it sounds like you hold yourself accountable as well. I'm always an advocate for extreme ownership, a little Jocko Willing. Do you have like a hierarchy of like, hey, like, do you have your best judgment on dealing with XYZ issue? If you can't figure it out, speak to John or Sarah, and then she can probably kind of dive in and help. And if that really doesn't work, then maybe come to me if it's a that once in a lifetime blue moon situation.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone has a very well-defined function within the organization. They literally we call it a task map, and it lists out every single task that has to get done at a property management company. Everything from answering the mail to processing security deposit dispositions to responding to lawsuits. There's hundreds. I forget exactly how many, probably like 260 of these tasks. So we have this big task map in Notion. Next to the task is who is responsible for it, when it needs to happen. Is this a monthly? Is this a quarterly? Is this weekly? Or what triggers it? And then the last column is how to do it. And there's, for almost every single one of those, there's a link to a page in our company Notion that explains all the background, the context, what you need to know, and how to do it.
That must have been a quick overnight process to make all that in Notion.
Yeah, this is something that took a long time to put together, but is really the backbone of what lets me do things like take a month off and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the foundation. So that takes care of a lot of the day-to-day stuff, right? Like no one is answering questions about what to do about a late fee, because that was like the first thing we documented.
Step number one, right?
Baked in, yeah. So now, of course, there's going to be weird one-offs that happen every day in this industry. And so from there, it's falling back on the people who are in the role. We try to empower them to make decisions on anything that is relatively minor, right? This is back to empowering your people. Some companies have a specific number, like if this is less than $100 in question, use your best judgment. Yep. And when they're using their judgment, that's where we look at the core values for the company. We have a set of 5 core values, and we encourage the team to fall back on those core values when they're making a decision like
What would those core values be?
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot here. Let me pull them up in my Notion so I don't forget any of them. So one of them is like a place for everything and everything in its place. And we talk about how that's specific, not just for physical items, but also for digital items as well. Like, you need to make sure that all the files go where they're supposed to go, and all of the keys go where they're supposed to go, like everything. So, okay, I got the rest pulled out here. Clear communication, figure it out and get it done. A place for everything and everything in its place. We said that one. We lend a hand always and do it in real time. So those are our core values. So if that doesn't make it clear, then you go to your manager, right? You have a discussion with your manager, and the manager should, took me a while to get clear on this, the manager should not just answer the question. Team member comes to the manager, says, hey, here's a situation, what do we do? Bad manager says, here's what you should do. Good manager says, tell me what you think you should do and walk me through your decision-making process, right? And forces that team member to exercise that skill of decision-making and synthesizing our core values and our previous experience, and really starts to let that team member, and sometimes I actually think it's important even to let a team member make mistakes in those situations, as long as they're not going to be costing our clients money or cause any type of long-term, damage to the company's reputation or anything like that. But you got to let people, you got to let them off the leash a little bit, because they're not going to learn if they're not making mistakes, and they're not going to feel accountable for their decisions. They're just going to, if you want people to just do what you say all the time, you have to be there telling them what to do.
That's a
not
dictatorship
what you
at
want.
that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Even for your managers, you want your managers to because you want your managers freed up to be focusing on higher level business functions. So
Very much so. Now, how I imagine you're having very productive meetings. How have you structured your meetings within RL that are the most effective? And I know people hate to go to a meeting and they feel like half of the conversation doesn't pertain to them and they're wasting their time. So, is there a secret sauce to this?
kind of there is. So we use EOS. So some of your listeners are probably familiar with Traction and the EOS system that Gino Wickman put together. So we run that by the book. And so we have our weekly level 10 meetings, both at the leadership level and the department level. We have quarterly rocks. We have annual goals. We have our vision traction organizer. So I'm a pretty big believer in that system. We've been running on that for years. And so if you want to learn how to run great meetings, they have a great template.
Excellent. Yeah, and I love the EOS mythology, because it really sets the stage of like making sure everyone's involved. And I also love what Jeff Bezos does, where he, obviously richest man in the world, or number 2, I think now. He steps into a meeting and he's always the last one to speak, because he wants the leadership team to try to solve it, and he knows if he weighs his opinion in, it might change the dynamic of the meeting, or someone might swallow their idea because they're afraid of insulting or stepping on eggshells around their leader.
Yeah, the other thing I've seen done really well along those lines is when you want to get input from everybody on an important question, like say you're in a leadership meeting and you're trying to decide if you want to start managing more Section 8 units because you see there's a big opportunity there, but you realize that there's downsides to doing that, right? Kind of a strategic level question. Well, if you just ask people and you have them go around the room, even if you speak last, each individual is going to be affected by what the other individuals said. So like if we start going around the room, an influential team member is going to give a very compelling answer, and then everyone else is probably just going to kind of say what they said because it's like the safe answer. So the way you get around this is you have everyone write down their answer. You have everyone take 3 minutes. Hey, I want you to write 3 bullet points of why you think this is a good idea or bad idea, and then we'll go around the room and I want you to read what you wrote, right? So that's a way of getting more of an unvarnished feedback from a leadership team or from any team member.
That's excellent advice. And you strike me as someone who's a very intentional person. I see a mountain of books behind you. You're clearly well-read and well-researched, and you seem to really want to take the best path forward, not only for your employees, but also for the business sense. And I think that's key. As an entrepreneur, we have to always continuously be learning and be a student and not just think we know everything. And I think ego definitely can get in the way of that as an entrepreneur. It's like, we started this is our baby, and it's hard to let go. With that being said, I know that you launched a Crane. So, I think it's closed to applicants right now, but correct me if I'm wrong. Can you go into a little bit what Crane is and how it can potentially help other property managers? Because what you're saying and espousing, it may come across as common knowledge, but I know that there's people out there who are just getting started that are aching to learn, like through your hardships, of how they can have great takeaways.
Yeah, so Crane is a private paid community for third-party property managers. So if you manage at least 100 doors of third-party rental units, single family or small multifamily, then you meet the qualifications to apply for Crane. So I launched Crane about the middle of last year with my co-founder, Wolfgang Kroski. He's another property management company owner. He's in California. Very systems and process oriented guy, even more so than me in a lot of ways. super smart guy, very much on the leading edge of tech with things like Zapier and Lead Simple and AI and things like that. I've learned a lot from him. So he and I came together and we saw that there was a need in our industry for a high level mastermind, not necessarily for beginners, but for people who have been at it for a little while and they're ready to start taking things to that next level. Maybe they want to be able to take a month off. Maybe they want to be able to put together a real leadership team. Maybe they want to start running things on EOS. We wanted a place for those folks to be able to come together and talk. There's some Facebook groups out there, but they're kind of willy-nilly, open to everyone. There's drama, there's big personalities, there's vendors. We wanted more of an intimate space. So, the applicants are hand-selected by Wolf and I, and we only open up applications a couple times a year. We're actually getting ready to reopen them this week for the first time in many months. So I don't know when this will air, but if you go to joincrane.co, you'll see if it's open, you can apply. If it's closed, you can enter your email. You can be notified when they do reopen, and you'll be able, like, the first to know to fill out your application. So what it actually is, though, is we're in a circle community, which is kind of like Slack. So there's a chat function with the other members, and then Wolfgang and I have uploaded a bunch of resources from our companies, like our management agreements and our owner help section and a bunch of our forms and documents and Lead Simple processes, and pretty much anything that anyone asks for, we make that available to Crane members within. And we have some content that we don't share publicly that's only available to Crane members. And then we also do meetups in conjunction with the property management conferences for Crane members only. And we try to make those super fun and like outside the norm. So, for example, coming up, NARPM Broker Owner in Florida in
Florida.
May, I think.
Yeah, March. I want to say March 21st, maybe. I could be totally wrong.
Yeah, I can't remember when it is, but we're doing like a 3-hour dinner cruise that we booked just for Crane members. So we're gonna sail around the island, and there's dinner and like sightseeing. It's gonna be super fun. So yeah, stuff like that. So if you're a residential property manager, you're interested, I'm sure you can find the link in the description.
And I can espouse the biggest mistake I made as a business owner. It was being in an island in my own head of not really having peer-to-peer relationships to kick off ideas and learn from, or just vent in some cases. And I think if I would have joined something like Crane early in my career, it would have exploded my growth, because all it takes is one nugget of an idea of, like, using Notion, for example, to take it and run with it, and then see 10x growth from there. And then you're also going to have camaraderie of people who are doing the same thing as you, which is very rare. Now, obviously, every state you're going to have your own local friendly competitors in there, but to have an intentional meeting, I think, is really key. So how often is Crane getting together? Is it a monthly basis? Is it weekly? Walk me through a little bit of the inner workings, if you don't mind.
So we have a monthly kind of membership meeting where Wolf and I will do a short presentation on something we think would be valuable for the group. Sometimes we'll bring in a guest, and we open that up to Q&A as well. All those are recorded and made available within the community. Other than that, the chat is pretty active. So the members are asking questions and answering questions to help each other out. And Wolf and I will jump in there as well with any random thing that's coming up in their business. Hey, our E&O policy's up for renewal. They jacked our rates. Who are you using for E&O, right? We'll get a bunch of high quality
great network, right?
Stuff like that. Yeah. So that's a main core functionality of the community. And then the meetups we'll do in conjunction with 2 or 3 NARPM events throughout the year.
That's fantastic. And I highly recommend anyone who's either launching a property manager, not launching, who has the 100-unit minimum count, to reach out, who really wants to have some significant intentional growth, because we don't want to grow from 100 to 200 and it's all bad owners, more headaches. And to your point, you can't go away for a month. You're working 80 hours again. I always say, like, it's in the beginning stages. I always say it's like the fun part of, like, when you get your first client, you starting to see that things are working out. And then suddenly, if you don't have the right systems in place, it doesn't become fun anymore. And that's when you see people who hate the industry, who have to exit it, or they just, they're not really enjoying themselves. So it can be a thankless job, property management. But in a lot of cases, you will get the rewards on your employee side. You'll get the rewards on having a great tenant experience in some cases. And if you're managing and increasing cash flow, your owners are going to love you. So you deal with the good and the bad in property management, as I always say. Um, Now, you mentioned your partner was going to integrate Zapier with, like, say, Lead Simple. Where do you, and this is a huge question, and it's a buzzword now, but how do you feel about AI and how it will impact the property management industry? Like, what are some tools that you guys are incorporating that 2 years ago was not really a thing?
Definitely think it's going to make a major impact on the industry. Appfolio's got some really cool stuff that they're working on with AI called Realm. They're going to have a conversation. They're already beta testing this. And I had their head of AI on my podcast to talk about this, Kat Allday. She's awesome. So they've got like a conversational AI interface that is built into the platform where you can ask it not only like stuff like, hey, how do I add a late rent fee to a lease ledger, right? Of course, we would expect that you'd be able to do something like that. But you can even ask it things like, hey, how many maintenance requests came from this property in the last 30 days? It'll give you an
Oh, that's
answer.
cool.
Or, hey, I'd like you to adjust the management fee for this property from 8% to 9%, and it can do that.
Oh, that's
So
very.
really powerful stuff on the horizon for our industry, because I have to imagine that the other property management
I'm
software
sure
companies are
Building already,
working
they're going
on
to follow suit
similar.
eventually. If I'm sure
Yeah.
they're trying.
There's so many areas of low-hanging fruit here, like especially anytime that you're communicating with a resident. I mean, we're all familiar now with the ability to use ChatGPT to adjust the tone, make it shorter, make it longer, make it meaner, make it nicer. You're starting to see some of that get built into the tools that we're using. So Property Meld, for example, has that built in. They also have a language function built in where you can, within Property Meld, translate back and forth to different languages. So I'm really excited. Wolf and I did a whole webinar on, what we're using AI for in the business. I think that's a free public webinar. We can dig that up. But I love experimenting with this and seeing what other people are up to, finding ways to level up our business and keep growing and make things smoother and more efficient. We use Notion a lot. I've talked about that. Notion has a really cool built-in AI feature as well. So the way to think about this is like, it's going to be great when our property management tools have AI built in, and some of them are starting to, but just because they don't doesn't mean you can't use AI for your business, right? We're using, every property manager listening to this with more than a couple dozen doors has probably 10 softwares that they're using every day, from Google to Buildium or Appfolio to their accounting software to something like Notion to a project management software to Zapier to like all the point solutions like Showmojo and there's so many, and
I think I
so
count once. I
don't
think it was
just
11 software platforms that
yeah,
the team would have to know.
it's tough.
Yeah.
But start to look at how you can use AI within some of those, or using AI to connect some of those, or eliminate some of those. So that's the way I think about it.
So what is the future plans of not only RL, but Peter Lohmann himself? Because you've built a fairly successful business. I'm sure you're doing well with the crane. I know the engineering company you have coming up as well. Do you want to do like more property, like manage, get up to 2,000 doors, or do you want to kind of hold the ship steady, increase 5% a year while you focus on some of these other projects? Like what for you personally, what is the end goal for you? Do you want to do it where every business is running, where you're only 15 to 20 hours overall, involved, so you can have some personal time, passions, children, whatever it happens to be? I'm curious.
Sure. Yeah. So the engineering company is, so I co-own that with my original business partner, Adam Rich. He and I founded the management company together, and we own rental properties together. So he runs that company as CEO. So I'm actually not involved in that engineering company whatsoever, other than owning 50% of it. He and I have a monthly leadership meeting where we review how the company is doing. We talk about strategy. But so he's running that company. He's completely out of the management company. So what I have on my plate right now is RL property management, crane, and then what I think of as kind of like my media stuff that I do. So I have a podcast, I have a newsletter, I'm very active on Twitter. I think of all that as kind of like media type stuff.
Branding, if you will. Right. Sure.
Yeah. So as I think about the future, I'm sort of weighing these different opportunities and thinking about where can I add the most value, what's fun for me, what's coming easy for me. I'm really excited about our property management right now. We had 2023 was a difficult year. We ended the year, it was our most profitable year ever, but we were down on units and we lost several key team members. And so it's been a year of rebuilding, reorganizing, and setting things up for a fantastic 2024. So what I really want to see over the next year for RL Property Management is aggressive growth, returning to aggressive growth, make back all that ground we lost and then some. And we're bringing in some key new hires. We're bringing in an in-house marketing person for the first time ever. We're currently looking right now for a new business development manager, basically a salesperson. And we got a few other really key hires that I think are going to help that business grow to the next level, which for me, I think of that as like 800 to 1,000 units.
That's fantastic, man. And so what's the plan of action as far as the marketing to get to that number? Because obviously a lot of the PMs listening are using Lead Simple. Maybe they're using like Google ad campaign or Facebook ads. But what have you found the most effective? And obviously you want to do as many things as possible that are effective, but what would you say is going to take you from that 700 to the $1,000, the 1,000 unit number?
Yeah, so it's going to be a bunch of little stuff, or not a bunch of little stuff. It's going to be a bunch of things all working together to get us the lead flow that we need. And I know based on our closing rate and our average units per client, I know that we need 40 to 50 valid leads a month if we're going to have a shot of hitting our growth goals. And right now we're at around 30. So that's going to look like anything we can do to get an incremental 1 or 2 extra leads per month, whether that's pay-per-click, whether that's hosting events, whether that's webinars, whether that's, SEO, blog posts. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do from a marketing perspective. And I think there's no silver bullet here. It's just going to be diligently and consistently executing on all of these things to bring in a few extra leads a month from all those different sources. A big one I'm bullish on for this year is in-person stuff in our community. So going to BNI, we've got multiple team members going to multiple BNI groups right now because I've kind of come back around on those local referral partners can be a really powerful way to grow your business. The other thing I'm really bullish on is we're going to start hosting events at our office, like real estate investor meetups,
educational, sure, value.
Yeah. Educational events. We're going to invite our clients. We're going to invite our potential clients. We're going to invite the general real estate investor community, open up our office. We've got a nice space here for that, and really start to find a way to serve that local real estate investor community. And what I think is key though here is you have to go into something like this with the right intention. If your intention is, we're going to grow our business and I'm going to get rich, that is going to taint everything from the way you talk to your team about it, and it's going to trickle all the way down. And the people who you're trying to reach are going to sense that. I mean, humans are so good at sussing this type of thing out. They're going to smell it from a mile away and no one's going to care or be interested.
Very true.
But if you go into it with the intention of, I genuinely care about real estate investors and I genuinely want them to be successful with their real estate investments, whether that's us managing it, whether that's someone else who's a better fit managing it, or whether that's the investor self-managing it with some tools that we've given them, if you want them to be successful, regardless of the path that they choose, then that's going to come through and you're going to be able to show up authentically. And in the long run, you're going to end up with more business, ironically, because of the way you're demonstrating and providing value and the way that you're interacting with those people. So I've gotten really clear on that over the last few years. It doesn't come naturally because as an engineer, I'm not a natural marketer or salesperson, but just had it beat into my head enough times from people I respect that that's really the way you have to do these things. And it's kind of a long game and some of the stuff's not going to pay off. And that's different than what we're used to in operations where every dollar has to be accounted for. In marketing, you're going to have some swings and misses and you just got to get comfortable with that and keep trying and stay consistent.
So that's what the giver's gain mentality of BNI I like to espouse. And so I can hopefully add a little bit of value here. My background is in sales and marketing. What I always espouse is that you don't necessarily want leads. You want appointments. You want discovery calls above all else. What I found, and it really touches on what you just mentioned, is that value add of education of like, hey, I'm here for you. These are the tools of the trade that have helped. If you want to DIY this, absolutely. So typically what I like to build out is if a lead comes in, regardless of where it came from, let's just say it goes into your Lead Simple platform, and then you get on camera, and then there's the very intentional email campaign that goes out and text message over the next 7 days. And the 7 days is key. And that's all value add of like, hey, I'm Peter. Thank you so much for inquiring about, XYZ property. This is who I am. This is who we're about. I have anything we could do to help. Here's a little PDF. And then every consistent day, it's a video. And I think a lot of people like to hide behind just email copyright. I always espouse that the owner gets in front of the camera, and you seem very comfortable in front of the camera. And then every single day, there is going to be a video element of just speaking about whatever issue of like, hey, this is a turnover that's happening. Maybe you're going through an eviction. And every single time this is happening, it's you espousing about how you would go through it as a property manager. And what I've noticed is that conversion rates double because you're more than, think about most people, they say they go on APM, right? All property management, and they send out they get 5 requests coming in. Chances are they're all in Lead Simple, and they're the real professional companies. They're all going to get a generic email saying, thank you for reaching out, blah, blah, blah. Here's a link to my calendar. The person that's going to be getting that sales call, a discovery call, is the one that's going to give the most value and have a personality behind it. And that's typically, it doesn't have to be the owner, but whoever that BDM point of contact is should be on video introducing themselves. And you're going to see a tremendous difference here just by doing small little tweaks like that. And I always espouse to use Calendly and make sure that booking tool is also embedded into your lead pipeline, wherever it happens to be. And then it should automatically drop into like long-term nurture if they don't answer you. And obviously your BDMs, they're not off the hook. They got to be picking up the phone, making phone calls in tandem with this. But that's one little suggestion. I know you're aiming for some big growth, but I would definitely espouse building out that marketing campaign on the front end of not selling anything, but more of just giving as much value add as humanly possible and imaginable. And if they know, and if that's the first takeaway, because people are evaluating companies constantly, where you're building up a relationship, because we're in the relationship business here. They're going to be say, okay, if they're great at just this sales and marketing approach, they're going to be kick ass when they're going to be managing my units. Though that's the hope, at least. So I think you're going to get there, man. You're a highly intelligent person. I'm going to humble brag for you, and I know that you have you have a clear strategic vision of what the future is going to be. So with that being said, I always like to end the show with asking the same question. And I always say to bring me back to that younger self, that potentially insecure 20-year-old who is in college maybe and, going into, say, a master's degree in electrical engineering in this case. What values would you espouse and what lessons learned, if you can kind of summarize it to that specific person? What would you tell a young Peter at that time?
I've gotten really clear that when you're starting out, we all have this tendency to focus too much on the tools and on making exactly the right decisions. And that slows us way down because we end up spending so much time researching what's the right CRM tool, what's the right property management software, what's the right marketing tool. And then we agonize over these decisions about like, what should my PMA look like? What about my lease? I need this form. I need that form. And we become paralyzed because what we believe at that time, and I believe this too, is that only with exactly the right setup and exactly all the right decisions will I be successful. If I mess up and I select the wrong software or I make the wrong decision about hiring a client or hiring an employee or anything related to business, then I'm doomed to failure. And it's not intuitive, but it's actually kind of the opposite of that, which is the specific decisions that you're making on any given day and the specific tools and tech that you're using doesn't really matter. What matters is the cadence. The faster you can make decisions and the faster you can get started, the more likely you are to be successful. Because in the beginning, it's all about getting those reps in. It's about getting experience and making mistakes and learning from them and starting to build those neural pathways in your brain that help you understand how business works and how property management works and how your home service company works. You can't read that. You have to live it. And so I encourage anyone who's starting and early on to just do stuff. Just get started. And like, don't worry about if you're making mistakes. Don't worry about if you're using the wrong tech. Just go, and you will figure all that stuff out as you go, and you can course correct. Business is all about speed of decision making. It's not about making the exact right decision every single time. There's just too many decisions, and you don't have enough information to be able to make a perfect decision every time. It's I came into business from an investing background in some way because we had bought rental properties, and I've always been interested in the stock market and things like that. And when you're buying rental properties and when you're investing in stocks, the decisions are make or break. It's everything. Buying the right property or buying the wrong property, picking the right stock or selling at the wrong price. These are things that have massive impacts on your net worth down the line. They really do. And you really should take a long time and analyze from every angle and don't rush and like be really systematic and methodical. So when I first started in business, I brought that same mindset, and my business partner is even more so. And that turns out to not be effective in trying to grow a business. In business, it's not about quality of decision making. Obviously, you want to make good decisions. It's about speed of decision making and iterating quickly and learning. So that's my advice to anyone who's starting out is like, stop reading books, stop listening to podcasts, just go.
Just take action, man.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's get
I would
started.
say you need 70 to 80%
we'll figure
of
out
data.
the rest as we
Yeah.
go.
And you're going to make mistakes, man. Just you gotta shoot from the hip and you know, to see what works. At 78% of the data, that's all I need, and just go. It's like when you go to I always use this as an example. Thank you for sharing that. You're sitting down in a restaurant, you get handed all the menus, you're sitting with 10 people. It takes me about all of 15 seconds to know what I want to eat. I put the menu down. And I noticed that trait when it comes to high net worth individuals. When they come, what are you getting? Steak, medium rare, perfect. You? I don't know. Next. You know, you have to be able to just go with your gut and live with your decision, whatever it may be. So with that being said, Peter, I really tremendously appreciate you coming on the show and sharing a wide breadth of knowledge in long-term property management. I think a lot of people are going to take some key takeaways, and particularly with some of your operational stuff. Like, I love the fact that you use Notion. If you ever saw me darting away, I was taking notes on some of the timelines because I want to take this and make this into cool reels for people to use.
Nice. Okay, cool.
So I'll freely share that. So if anyone wants and who lives in the Columbus, Ohio, or I guess Cincinnati, Ohio region is looking for a property manager, please do not hesitate to reach out to Peter's team. I'm sure you're going to be well taken care of. And anyone who wants to reach out to Peter in general, whether for Crane or just business inquiries, where can they find you?
Best place is probably my website, peterlohmann.com. That's got links out to everything I'm doing, podcast, Twitter, email, newsletter, all that good stuff. Crane.
Awesome, man. Again, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Sounds good. Appreciate you having me, Steve.
My pleasure.